Hey there, and welcome to the Take 3 Theological Discussion Hour. You are here with myself, Erica, Seth, and Christine, and tonight we are going to tackle our Thanksgiving edition, which is very exciting. Everybody likes Thanksgiving. For those of you who are not from the USA, it's a little thing that we have. The Pilgrims came over, ran into a rock, celebrated with some Indians, and we've been eating turkey ever since. So have a good time tonight. It's going to be a pretty easy episode compared to last week, and we just want to bring you some happy thoughts, some thankful thoughts for the upcoming week, and hoping you guys have a great celebration. So first up, we're going to hear from Seth talking about Saint Catherine of Alexandria and Saint Catherine Laboure.
Well, hey everybody, and Erica, I'm glad that you said that it's going to be an easier time than last week, even though there's a lot of death and carnage in Catherine of Alexandria's story. Um, so Thanksgiving, as those of you in the U.S. know, is a movable feast. It happens on the fourth Thursday of November, so it kind of moves around a little bit as far as date goes, but usually it falls right in a period that on the liturgical calendar has a lot of saints whose names begin with the letter C. So we talked about Saint Clement last week. His feast day was on Saturday, the Saturday that just passed us by. There's also Saint Cecilia, who is important to our friend Christine.
Woot woot!
Happy belated feast day to Christine.
Thank you.
Day, which was on the 22nd. Also, there's St. Columban, St. Chrysogonus, and two St. Catherines. We're going to be talking about the Catherines today. Catherine of Alexandria's feast is actually today, the 25th. Although I believe in the Eastern churches it's celebrated on the 24th. So Catherine is a very, very interesting saint because she was incredibly popular in the Middle Ages. Like one of the most popular saints. There's multiple churches and chapels dedicated to her. She was one of the 14 Holy Helpers, which was a popular devotion in the Middle Ages. So Christine asks me every week, and I'm never prepared, so I'm prepared this week. She's the patron saint of. It's actually probably easier to talk about what she is not the patron saint of. She's the patron saint of practically everything, from philosophers to theologians, lawyers, unmarried women, knife sharpeners, librarians, hat makers, and mechanics.
She sounds like she could be my best friend.
I know, she's great. She is.
You don't get a Catherine wheel for no reason. I mean.
Exactly.
No.
Well, she's
Fair.
patroness of pretty much anything that involves a wheel, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So another kind of interesting thing about Catherine is that there is not a defined historical figure that she's based on. So for that reason, she was actually dropped. Her feast day was dropped from the Roman calendar by Paul VI, and she was dropped off the calendar along with a lot of other pretty popular saints who are maybe historically dubious. So like Christopher, Barbara, Ursula, all saints who are incredibly popular, who don't have the firmest historical record. So, but unlike some of those saints, Catherine's feast was reintroduced to the Roman calendar in 2002 by John Paul II, and it is an optional memorial. So you are completely licit in celebrating Catherine's feast. Not that you weren't before, but she can now be celebrated as an optional memorial by the church. So one of the things that is a little bit interesting about, yes, Erica. We're making like hand signs to each other, which our listeners do not know, but
Did Catherine completely fall out of style for a while, or was it just what you said, Paul VI?
Yes. So
was she kept up in popular piety though, or not?
I mean, yeah, she's never, just like Christopher, she's been super popular. So people never stopped having devotion to her, but it's just a matter of having an official liturgical feast day. So there's people like Saint Ursula, who is still not on the calendar, but communities like the Ursuline nuns still celebrate Saint Ursula, obviously, because they're named after her. But it's just a matter of like universal acceptance of the feast day, is my understanding of that whole process. So what was I saying? Oh, so Catherine, so the story of St. Catherine is that she was a beautiful and knowledgeable young woman during the time of Christian persecution during the Roman Empire. And she somehow got into a dispute with the Emperor Maxentius about, the reasonability of Christianity. And she was so smart that she was able to outdo the Emperor Maxentius in this debate about Christianity, or whether it was better than paganism. So Maxentius gets really upset and hires 50 philosophers to come and dispute with her about it. And Catherine converts all 50 of the philosophers, which really ticks Maxentius off, so he has them all burned alive. And then Maxentius goes like on vacation or something, and his wife comes to talk to Catherine, and she converts the emperor's wife as well. And the emperor, kills his wife also.
So this emperor, he just couldn't take a hint. He was
Yeah.
just like, I'm going to keep sending these things at you. They're all going to fail, but because I'm emperor.
He's like the ultimate mansplainer, apparently.
Ah.
So anyway, Catherine's main attribute in art is a spiked wheel, and that comes from her legend that she was condemned to be broken on the wheel, but then when she approached the wheel, it broke into pieces. So ultimately, to martyr her, she had to be beheaded. And then the story goes that her body was taken by angels up to a mountain, upon which was founded a monastery. And St. Catherine's Monastery is still around. It's a Greek Orthodox monastery that is, to my knowledge, on Mount Sinai.
Yeah, I think that's correct, and I think it's the oldest continually functioning monastery in the world. That it's still like,
correct.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so crazy thing, I didn't even think about it until you said it, but you make reference to her breaking the wheel, and I don't know, I know Christine does not watch Game of Thrones, but that's totally Daenerys Targaryen says that over and over and over, and I'm wondering if it's inspiration from Catherine.
Well, I don't know. That would be very appropriate, though, because the figure of Catherine seems to be drawn from multitude of different sources. So one of the most interesting sources, historical sources, that scholars think she is perhaps based on was the philosopher Hypatia of Athens, who was actually a pagan philosopher.
She's cool.
Very cool, but it's interesting that the historical moment of Hypatia is flipped around in Catherine's story, because Hypatia was pagan and was killed by a mob of Christians, whereas in the Catherine story, obviously she's Christian and is killed by a very stubborn pagan emperor. It's also thought that she is partially just kind of the fabrication of a Greek Christian author who came up with a really interesting kind of romantic story to be edifying to the Christian community. And then the third kind of quasi-historical personage that she's thought to perhaps be based upon is a story from Eusebius, where he talks about a Roman woman who was sent into exile because she refused to convert to Christianity, or because she refused to renounce Christianity. So definitely interesting figure, still a very popular figure, and she's back on the calendar. So, celebrate away today. She's her feast days today, so party down. The second Catherine that we'll talk about is maybe slightly less exciting, but still no less. Still, actually, no, I shouldn't say that. She's rad. Catherine Laboure was a 19th century daughter of charity. So she was a sister in the community founded by St. Vincent de Paul and St. Louise de Marillac. She had a vision in the 1830s of the Virgin Mary. And because through that vision, the Virgin Mary told St. Catherine Laboure that the Virgin wanted a new religious medal to be struck for the faithful to wear, to kind of to make use of the graces that the Virgin Mary is all too willing to, mediate to us. So that medal, the miraculous medal, is actually a very widespread medal. Most people probably have one, at least most Catholics have one. On one side is a very familiar image of the Virgin Mary, Our Lady of Grace, kind of with her hands extended. And then on the other side is a large letter M with a cross kind of surmounting it, and then images of the Sacred Heart and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So a lot of people probably have this medal, don't even know where it comes from, but the design for the medal was actually given to St. Catherine Laboure when she had this vision of the Virgin Mary in a little chapel in Paris, the chapel at the Rue de Bac, which was where the Daughters of Charity, I believe, still is their headquarters. And so just a little personal anecdote about St. Catherine Laboure is if you go to Paris, I would definitely recommend going to the Rue de Bac. It is a very popular religious pilgrimage site. So if you can get into the Rue de Bac and there is not a mass going on, I will be really impressed. I have been to it several times, and every single time I go, there's a mass. So it's like you kind of have to just, not that there's anything wrong with mass, but sometimes you want to just kind of sit quietly in a sacred space. That's very difficult to do there, but it is a beautiful chapel nonetheless. St. Catherine Laboure's relics are housed in the chapel. She is an incorrupt saint, so her coffin is glass, and you can see her incorrupt body. For those of you who do not know what that means certain saints do not decay. Their bodies do not decay after they've died, which is seen by the church as a mark of holiness. So St. Catherine Laboure's incorrupt body is in the chapel. St. Louise de Marillac, who is one of the founders of the Daughters of Charity's relics, are also in that chapel. And the heart of St. Vincent de Paul is housed in that chapel, is not in a glass case. It's in a tasteful reliquary. And probably my favorite relic, aside from, of course, Catherine. Well, I don't know. All of them are great. But one of the most hilarious relics in the chapel at the Rue de Bac is the chair that the Virgin Mary sat in when she came to visit St. Catherine Laboure. It's right there next to the altar, the blue chair that Mary sat in. Because, when you're from heaven, you want to sit down.
Well, yeah, I'm just glad, she had some proper hospitality. I mean, if Peter has his chair that has its own friggin' feast, right? Then the Blessed Mother's chair should get a little bit of recognition.
And it does. It's right.
Yes. And it's blue. It doesn't get any better than that.
Right. I love it. I love it so much. Also, trying to explain St. Peter's chair to people who are not Catholic is really just one of my favorite things to do. They're like, wait a minute, what? Oh, my cats just stole a cookie off my plate. Oh well. C is for cookie, and that's good enough for me. So.
And Catherine's.
And Catherine's and Clement's and Columbin's.
Yes.
And Cecilia's.
Awesome.
All right, so those are my saints for this, our saints for this week. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, pray for us and happy feast day.
Amen.
Yay. So I'm going to do a really short little entertainment blurb for you, and we weren't going to at first, but in sharing Thanksgiving books, every season with my kids, we switch out our books, so that way we're reading whatever the upcoming holiday is. And I realized today that we actually have a favorite Thanksgiving book. And so we're going from Catherine's to Cat. Pete the Cat, the First Thanksgiving. Now, part of the reason I'm doing this is because I promised all of you that I would do something that wasn't rated R. And this is totally not rated R. First of all, Pete the Cat, the First Thanksgiving. Come on, folks. Let's hear it for Pete the Cat. It is written by James Dean and his wife, Kimberly Dean. James is the illustrator and writes some of it, and Kimberly does most of the authorship of the book.
We're not talking about the James Dean, but
no, not that James Dean.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
This is not written
Little
from beyond
known fact
the veil.
About the actor James Dean.
Yes, is that he actually writes Pete the Cat. This is terrible. So it was written in 2013. It is on paperback on Amazon for $5.64. Okay, and hold up, y'all. The best part, it's a Lift the Flap book. Lift the Flap book, Pete the Cat at Thanksgiving, and it actually talks about the real Thanksgiving story. So it's not total fluff, it's educational, and that is my Thanksgiving read for all of you.
I wish we had a Lift the Flap book about St. Catherine.
That is something that you and I and Christine could totally work on.
Lift the flap and there's 50 burning philosophers. That would be...
Lift up the Catherine wheel and see what's underneath.
Yeah.
Wait. So
we could even do scratch and sniff.
With lift the flap. Are those kind of like pop-up books?
Pop up. The whole thing pops up. These have little segments that you lift up, and you read something different underneath, or there's a surprise underneath.
An advent calendar mechanics in a book?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Totally.
Awesome.
But they're really popular. My kids love them, and it gets them to read things that they sometimes otherwise would not read. Although Pete the Cat is always a favorite in my household.
Awesome.
I'm glad that we worked in an advent calendar to our conversation.
Hey, I was just trying to figure out what you guys were talking about.
Well, and for those of you who need to purchase your advent calendars, I would get on it because the chocolate ones are sold out everywhere.
Yeah, Advent begins on this coming up Sunday, so.
Oh, well, that means the whiskey ones are definitely gone.
There's a whiskey Advent calendar?
There's whiskey, there's Legos.
It's whiskey sampler. There's a wee dram in every day, and it's a different type of whiskey for every day.
Oh, okay, that's it, folks. We're going to regroup. Next week, we are talking about Advent calendars.
Can we do, reviews of it? All right, sorry.
Yes. Coming up next week, Advent calendar reviews.
I've not even had the whiskey one. I've just seen it, and every year, I got to try that. Okay. All right. Back on track. We got to focus, guys. Got to focus. We're skipping my heresy of the week because it's Thanksgiving. Who wants to talk about heresy? Erica, you had something else you wanted to talk about this week.
I do. I think in light of Thanksgiving and last week being so serious and me really coming down hard on some of our Christian counterparts here, the other side of this, and Seth and Christine really highlighted the fact that we have a lot of people in the church that volunteer and help to make things better for those in need. And so this week, I kind of wanted to just really briefly talk about the importance of volunteering. And it doesn't have to just be in a Catholic setting or a Christian setting. My favorite place to volunteer right now is actually my daughter's school. And the reason that I love to volunteer at her school is it's not a private school. We are a community, and it's not a school system that has a lot of money. So without people to give their time, we really suffer, and the kids suffer with not having as much advantage as another school system would that is very affluent. So I think part of the importance of this, and I think Christine is going to highlight some other things, is just to talk about small snippets of time that you can give in order to really make a difference. And I'm going to turn it over to Christine for a second because she put these small snippets of time really, really well.
So when Erica and I were discussing this a couple days ago, we were talking about what we wanted to talk about on the show. And she brought up volunteerism, and a lot of things sort of flooded into my head at that point. So I'm going to try to go through them and remember everything that I discussed with Erica. So the first thing is, a lot of times, especially if you're sort of Generation X or later in America, you couldn't graduate from high school without mandatory volunteer hours. And if you were involved in scouting or confirmation classes or any other activity, there were mandatory service hours associated with this. Now, I don't want to discuss the motivations behind why that might have happened in the school systems. But I know the effect for me when I got to college was I was so burnt out on volunteering and doing the mandatory service hours that I really wasn't able to volunteer for anything for a long time. And part of the sort of after effect of having been really forced into so many labor hours was not only was I burnt out, but my very concept of what volunteering was very limited and skewed. And so one of the things I wanted to bring up was, if you got through the high school service hours, you were probably inundated with hours for serving at the soup kitchen or the homeless shelter. Very sort of the very set normal things that everyone does. And that's what you would always thought of as being volunteering. But honestly, volunteering, it doesn't need to be you go and you take several hours out of your week to go help with a meal at the soup kitchen, though good God, if that's where your heart lies, go for it, because they do need volunteers and assistants. But I would say, one, look at the talents and the skills that you have, especially in your professional life, that you can give to your local community. You know, if you're an accountant, does your church or is there another organization close to your heart that might be able to use your bookkeeping skills? And it doesn't need to be a long time. It can be 15 minutes on a Saturday, or an hour on a Saturday. You just go in and you look through the books and you help tidy them up. Are you a mechanic? Is there a shelter or a church, or again, any other charity that calls to your heart that you could donate your skills as a mechanic, or your skills as a plumber, or your skills as a businessman or advertising executive? You know, everyone has skills. Despite my life dreams, I now know a lot about contracting, which means what can my skills in contracts go to, or my skills in music, because that's really what I trained for in college. So look at where your passions are. Look how that crosses over with local communities. And I say local because that's where everything starts. Don't go. I mean, if you've got the thousands of dollars to donate to the poor kids in Ethiopia, go for it. I'm not going to say don't do it. But charity starts at home. It starts first with your family, and then then your community, and then outside of there, and it'll mean more if you can see what your time and effort is going to. It'll build your community, and that's what we really, really need right now. Our communities are very, very strained at best, but every 15 minutes that you put in helping build that community, it'll do wonders for your mindset. It'll do wonders for your soul, and it'll do wonders for your community. So don't think of volunteering as just what you always see promoted as volunteering. Think outside the box. And also the other side of that is no one has the right to your time. No one has the right to expect your time and your efforts. And I know that's part of what burned me out after high school was the weight of expectation. You have the right to expect that you give to your community. God may have the right to expect that you give to your community, but do not let anyone take advantage of your service, because that is the fastest way to get burnt out on it. And it's just no good. If it's impacting the rest of your life in a negative way, step back. And I say that because I've seen a lot of other people. Some people don't volunteer at all, and then they wonder why their life is so empty and devoid of meaning. Some other people I've seen just go completely overboard until their family suffered from them never being home, or them expending resources, but their own children were suffering. So keep it in balance, but look for different ways than just what you were forced into to graduate high school. So those are really the things that I kind of discussed with Erica. But I will say, for myself, what I do, because I am shy and an introvert and have like 15 different projects always going on at one time, I volunteer with the Ladies of Charity at my church. And what I do with them is we have a religious goods store attached to our church. And once every 5 weeks, I have one shift, 15 minutes before Mass, 15 minutes after Mass. We sell religious goods, unblessed, of course. And the net income from those sales goes to support what the Ladies of Charities does. And the Ladies of Charity at my church basically fill in the gaps for a lot of the local homeless shelters, and they help pay for funerals for the homeless and some other things. So it's sort of several steps removed from the immediate help to the community, but it is a little bit, it's what little I can give back in between writing and artwork and podcasting and things like that. So even those little, 15 minutes at a time, if everyone gives 15 minutes to their community or 15 minutes extra to their family, these things have ripple effects out into the world, and you can't underestimate how good can magnify itself once it's released into the world. So that's what I had to say.
You want to be Scrooge after the three ghosts have visited you, not before the three ghosts, which incidentally is probably one of my favorite holiday stories of all time. Christmas Carol, for those of you who have not read it, it's amazing. But yes, everything Christine said, I totally back and second. And I guess for me, in working at a parish, know how hard it is sometimes to get volunteers. And I totally understand families. I get it. I have a husband that works 2 jobs. I have 2 kids. I'm writing dissertation. I get it. But as Christine said, if we want the world to get better, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes a month can actually make a huge impact and a huge difference.
Yeah. It's just, small things. That's actually, we haven't spoken of, our podcast started very soon after the feast of Therese of Lisieux. But one thing I always loved about her and the sort of the spirituality that she has in her autobiography, it really has this idea of you don't have to do great things for God. It's the small things, the tiny things that are done every day. Those are the battles, between good and evil that we can conquer and that we can take care of. So keep that in mind as you're having your Thanksgiving, as you're thankful and grateful for the great blessings bestowed upon you, bestowed upon all of us. And quite frankly, if you can hear this podcast, it means you have an internet connection, which means you are quite blessed indeed. Even if you're out, on a business trip or you're estranged from your family, as hard as that is, you are still alive, you are still breathing, you are still able to contribute to the overall well-being of the species. Therefore, you also have something to be thankful for. So be thankful and then pay it forward.
So I think we're going to start wrapping up, and I want to kind of leave you. Seth, do you have anything? You good?
No, I'm good.
Cool. You look good. You're welcome.
Thank you. I know.
So I want to wrap up with a quote from one of my favorite people in the history of the entire world, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And if anybody knows about Mother Teresa and you want to talk about selflessness, she is probably historically one of the most selfless people. And she said at one point, we ourselves feel that what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean would be less because of that missing drop. And I guess that kind of sums up what we want to talk about with Thanksgiving. And from all of us here at Take 3, we wish you the very happiest Thanksgiving. And for those of you overseas who don't celebrate Thanksgiving, we are thankful for having you as well. Good night and
Amen.
happy gobble day.
All right. Good night.